Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Major update today. The teams, the FIA and Formula 1 themselves officially vote through changes to the power unit regulations that have caused so much drama in recent weeks. But the remarkable turn of events here is that Mercedes have approved it as well. They are in agreement with the other teams trying to shut down what was perceived to be a substantial Mercedes advantage. Sources say they're on board with this because they can still pass the new test and therefore still potentially gain a massive competitive advantage, not just for this season, but beyond. Developing situation in the Middle East is also turning heads as to what that means for the start of this Formula 1 season. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. Massive congratulations to Charles and Alexandra Leclerc, officially married today. I don't have any pictures yet. I don't know. People spotted the ceremony anyway. So yes, congratulations to those two. We knew they were engaged for some time. I guess it makes sense to get it underway before the season starts. But we've got to start here really, because today, well, there's been a developing situation in the Middle East. Let's just leave it there for now. We've seen this before. This was a picture you guys may be familiar with from 2022. You can see the W13 there with the zero pods. This is when the missile struck Saudi Arabia during practice, and you could see it in the background of the Grand Prix track there in Jeddah. Now, there was lots of talk, as you will remember at the time, about cancelling the Grand Prix, calling off the weekends. That didn't happen. In the end, it was all okay, but it was a key talking point because turmoil in that region is always going to exist, it seems, to some degree. Hopefully, if any of you guys are in the area around the Middle East right now, or have those that are, everyone was unaffected today. But this is a picture from an explosion, a missile strike in Bahrain. And as a result, there have been consequences for what was meant to happen in Bahrain over these next couple of days. Bahrain, of course, is a small country. Given what happened, retaliatory strikes, all sorts going on in a manner that you might not expect. This is apparently where that strike that I just showed you the picture of took place. I cannot confirm nor deny this, but Bahrain is a small country. So if we go onto Google Maps, we're talking roughly here. The Grand Prix circuit is down here. So it's, again, as I say, it's a small country, so it's not going to be a million miles away. But people were saying that that strike hit a kilometre from where a lot of people were staying during the Bahrain test. So this has major implications for the season, potentially, because if this situation in the Middle East continues, the Bahrain Grand Prix is roughly 40 days away or so. It's not a million miles away. It's just over a month away from today. So there are plenty of implications there. We go Australia, China, Japan, then it's Bahrain into the start of April, and well, we'll see what the situation looks like then. There are other bigger implications, though, for the start of the season, because you might think, oh, well, it's good that we're not starting the year in Bahrain, which in this occasion is true, but also it doesn't mean that it's easy for them to get things sorted for Melbourne. We'll discuss why in a second. So there was meant to be a Pirelli tyre test, but given the situation, that looks like it's been cancelled, and that is the current discussion from Thomas Maher, among others, that will be called off for the time being. Potentially as well because of issues with travel. So this is a screenshot from a few hours ago now, but overnight, once it became clear what was happening in Tehran and elsewhere, the airspace around Iran has very much been, well, it's very quiet. And it's not just Iran, it's all the other countries along this kind of coastline in the immediate vicinity. The airlines are taking care to avoid any problems. Now, as a result of that, the Dubai International Airport, at least as of an hour or so ago, was at total standstill. And I don't remember the last time that happened. We can see, Bahrain among the other countries here. So currently, no flights in or out of the Middle East, at least in that area. The reason why this is important is because transport from Europe to the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne, we're roughly a week away from qualifying day on the Saturday, and of course tomorrow will be the Grand Prix very early here in the UK. But they're transporting equipment, right? It's on its way. And that will typically go through a Doha in Qatar, or it'll go through a Dubai or something of the sort. that is not going to be possible right now. So we understand that equipment delays are not only possible, but very probable. There will be some contingency planning, send them through Singapore or through Hong Kong or whatever, but that is not easy to resolve logistically. So the FIA and Formula 1 management actually gave a statement on this today, and they said our next 3 races are in Australia, China, Japan, not the Middle East. Those races are not for a number of weeks. As always, we closely monitor any situation like this and work closely with relevant authorities. So they don't say much, but they do say that we see it, we monitor it, we understand that this could be a potential issue. Fortunately, on this case for Formula 1, the first few Grand Prix are not in the Middle East as they have traditionally, well, not traditionally, but at least in recent years they have been. So this is an ongoing situation that the teams will have to deal with. Depending on who you ask, this will cause issues for Melbourne or it won't, because apparently, according to Soy Motor, Spanish source, several Formula 2 teams have had their equipment blocked due to the various airport closures in the Middle East, and as a result, even Formula 1 teams may be in a similar boat. Suspicions are growing that some equipment might not arrive in Melbourne on time. Of course, many drivers are getting their travel underway today, tomorrow, something in that ballpark, so they can get to Australia, have a few days to adjust to the time zone differences, and then run the Grand Prix on the weekend. So, yes, teams will have to work around this. De Keyser says, yes, the situation is concerning, but it should be okay. It'll take place in 40 days. For the moment, it's not an issue. Flights to Melbourne with stops there have been cancelled, so team personnel and industry professionals unable to depart today and are awaiting updates on a plan B from logistics, which will likely involve, as I say, Hong Kong, Singapore, or something like that. The equipment, though, is already there. No issues are foreseen, because we did see a couple of days ago some pictures of equipment getting loaded in to Melbourne. So most teams, the Formula 1 themselves, probably okay, but not an ideal scenario for multiple reasons by any means. Several other updates of the day. I just wanted to quickly mention, because yesterday we talked about Newey versus Honda, some finger pointing going on from both sides to say who is at fault for this Aston Martin shambles. That's caused a couple of implications. What I mentioned yesterday was that Newey wanted this design, where the battery, which is this bit in the orange here, is over 2 layers. This is a more traditional approach where you just slap the ICE straight into the battery. I mean, it's kind of a crude setup, but this is what you can do. But Newey wanted a more compact approach where the battery would be leveled over 2 layers. Just wanted to show you what that kind of looks like and maybe why that would have advantages. But it also has problems and implications, and, well, there's a feeling that Honda maybe said to Newey, okay, yeah, we can make that happen. But it caused issues, right? And maybe if they'd have stuck with this version, where Newey had to make more compromises with the Aston Martin chassis design, maybe they'd be in a better position than they are right now. That's difficult to say. What we do know is they're in a tricky spot, and Adrian Newey is the top man, right? So this is the tricky thing for Newey, is that, yeah, he's got to design the car, he's got to maintain these relationships with Honda, but also the buck does stop with him, right? He is the team principal and the managing technical partner, I think it's called. Now, look, is he going to do the media stuff? Like, no. They've got Pedro de la Rosa, who's going to do a lot of the kind of media-facing stuff. They got Jenson Button as an ambassador, so, you know, maybe there's opportunities there. The point is that, yeah, Newey still is calling the shots, but also given that he's got to focus on designing the car and fixing these issues, maybe there's a logic to have somebody else come in to try and help structure things slightly better. There's a feeling that Aston hired a lot of people, which they did, and mixing those all people into different departments and making sure they work with one another, given the speed at which they've hired top-level staff over the last few years, may have been too much. And is Newey, with all the other things he's got to focus on, the right man to solve that problem? That's why some people have said, could Horner return, right? Horner, we believe, is interested in taking an ownership stake in Alpine and being the team principal over there. But it can't be denied that a similar possibility could emerge at Aston Martin. Now, Horner would want a lot of control to such an extent that Lawrence Stroll might not be willing to give that up entirely. Lawrence Stroll still will want to call the shots from a finality perspective. But also, if the situation at Aston Martin is becoming increasingly desperate, there is an increasing logic to suggest, okay, maybe you just give Horner the keys and let him figure it out, whatever it takes, given that we know that Newey and Horner's relationship was fractured to an extent, but we believe was now somewhat reconciled. Apparently they went to like a Coldplay concert or something in the off-season. I seem to remember that being reported somewhere. So maybe there's something in that. However, we have 3 significant changes to next season in Formula 1. 2 of them, you might argue, are somewhat trivial. The third one is a big deal, but I guess actually which one you think is trivial is a matter for some debate. The first one is on Monaco. So last year, you guys remember, they introduced the mandatory 2-stop or 2-pit stop rule for the Grand Prix. Did it really change anything? No. Did it create some strange ideas? Okay, we're going to pit on lap 1 and we're going to go long and we're going to wait for the safety car and all this stuff. Yes, it created a little bit of chaos, but it didn't really change the fact that it was a procession and the guys couldn't overtake. So I don't really see the point in keeping that mandatory pit stop rule around. It's just a little bit cumbersome. It's a little bit more confusing for the fans that, it needs to be explained and all this. And it didn't really deliver anything as far as I'm concerned. You guys may disagree, and maybe you have to run the Grand Prix a few times before you see the conclusion of something like this. But yes, the mandatory 2-stop pit rule is gone. That's one change official for next season. The other interesting change, actually, just before we get onto this, is this third one, which is Q3 will go from being 12 minutes long to 13 minutes, which is quite an unusual change, right? Because, well, first of all, there are 22 cars on the grid now, so Q1 will go from 22 down to 16, 6 cars eliminated, which will still be 18 minutes. Q2 will go from 16 cars down to just 10 for the Q3 as normal. That will be 15 minutes as normal. So it was always 18, 15, 12 for the nice sensible numbers, right? Some nice multiples of 3. It's all very sensible. Q3 will now be a rather ugly prime number, 13 minutes rather than 12. So not 100% sure what their thought process behind this is. Q3, there's only enough time for 2 runs really. Either you've got 2 sets of new tyres or you haven't, so you do 1 set on the used, 1 set on the new, or whatever the case is. But, was anyone really thinking that it was too short? I don't mind. It doesn't really make much difference. I guess we're going to see the drivers sit in the garage for an extra minute instead of normal. So that's a decision they've decided to take. But the major one, with regard to all the drama in recent days, is regarding the compression ratio of these power units. So this has been an emerging story now for a long time. Initially, it felt like just a rumour. Then it became more clear that no, actually, this is true. Mercedes do have a way of extending that compression ratio beyond the 16:1 that is allowed. Again, there's lots of debate on how they should or shouldn't change the regulations in this regard. What we know is that it used to be 18:1 was mandated, and the teams didn't really try hard to push beyond that because it created too many problems if they tried to push it far beyond 18:1. Of course, that's what the regulations allowed, and there's always going to be a grey area there if you limit something in that way. But it didn't give much advantage. Now, the teams have gone from 18 down to 16, and they want to find a way to get closer to 18 again. Mercedes, we think, found a way. Maybe they can't get to 18, maybe they can get to 16.3:1 or whatever. There's been various speculations how they might have achieved this. Is it thermal deformation? Is it a secret slot somewhere in the cylinder that only fills up in certain conditions, but when the pressure is higher, it seals off and increases the compression ratio? All sorts of theories have flown around as a result. But Mercedes were pretty adamant that no, our car's not illegal. We worked with the FIA for a long time on these engines. Don't know what you guys are talking about. The other teams were adamant this is outrageous. We need to make sure we're on a level playing field to start the season. Audi, Honda especially weren't very happy. Ferrari obviously also were in the same position. And then Red Bull, we believe, because some engineers, maybe Ben Hodgkinson among others, they went from Mercedes to Red Bull, brought the idea of, hey, Mercedes are doing this, and they tried to find a way to do the same thing, but they weren't quite able to replicate the same effect, and as a result they've now snitched on Mercedes. It became public, and then they decided to vote against them. So the feeling was that 4 manufacturers, apart from Mercedes, were going to vote for changes to the way that the compression ratio is measured, which would therefore mean that Mercedes' engine was illegal. It looked like those 4 teams were going to vote for such a proposal. Mercedes would vote against. The FIA would probably vote in favour. Formula 1 would probably do so as well. And Mercedes would find themselves on the back foot at some point in the future. However, it turned out that Mercedes were actually quite happy with that. As we talked about a couple of days ago, they were set to approve such a change, and now there's been a new compromise, which has also been approved, but it has been approved also by Mercedes, and that is the critical thing. So initially, it was meant to be on the 1st of August, where the rules would change. Now it's on the 1st of June. So instead of roughly round 13, 14, we're now talking about round 8 in Monaco. That's when the compression ratio measurement will change. The rule stays the same. It can't be more than 16.0 measured at ... and that's where the grey area existed. So it used to be measured just at ambient temperature. That's how it is until the 31st of May. On the 1st of June, that changes, and it will also be measured at a higher temperature of 130 degrees. The crucial second part of this is that from 2027, it will only be measured at the higher temperature. Now, critically, this is still not measurement during operation, right? And that is a debate, and that may be possible, right? I don't know, it's probably difficult, but with certain centres, I'm sure these engineers could figure out a way to test it while the engine is actually running. My understanding is, to make changes to that extent about the architecture, it would require every single power unit manufacturer to agree, rather than just 4 or 5. So I wonder if you took that proposition to Mercedes, whether they would say, oh no, absolutely not. So I kind of feel like that would be their response. But on this occasion, it's being tested at a higher temperature, not far off operating temperatures. There's a feeling that the operating temperature definitely won't be exceeding 200 degrees. It probably will be higher than 130, but it's in the rough ballpark. It's certainly more relevant than 20, as it were, when it's being tested currently. So it was such an obvious grey area that it's still a surprise to me that other teams weren't on board with it. But the remarkable thing about this development, just to finish my point, next year in 2027, it will only be measured hot, and it won't be measured cold at all. So then it opens another potential grey area where maybe teams can find a way to make it pass the test hot, but it doesn't pass the test cold, nor when it's operating, because that's really what matters, right? Like, does it pass the test? Like, can you get more compression when it's operating? That's the question. But Mercedes, you might think they'd be against this, right? Oh, wow, we're measuring it now at 130 degrees. That's seriously hot. Like, that's not far off. Maybe it is pretty much operating temperature, maybe not quite operating conditions, which might be a different story again. But Mercedes are on board. It was unanimously approved. And this is why Toto and Mercedes might be laughing all the way to the bank, because senior insiders have told BBC Sport and Andrew Benson that the Mercedes engine passes both of these new tests. It doesn't matter. Ambient, it passes the tests, and at this new higher, pretty much operating temperature, 130 degrees, it passes the test as well. It still complies with the limit. So it's a bit of very interesting development. Toto and Mercedes will say, oh, this is a storm in a teacup. The other teams are complaining about nothing serious. We have no real advantage from this. Toto says, oh, maybe we're gaining a couple of horsepower here or there, but it's no big deal. It's like, okay, do we believe Mercedes? Do we not? Are Mercedes engineers just that good that they found a way that they can actually gain serious performance while the engine is running? But when it's tested at that operating temperature but static, it passes. And when it's tested at ambient temperature, it passes too. So, look, we don't really know, but the conclusion is that Mercedes have either got away with one and they have an advantage which will be lasting because, the teams have tried to find a solution here, and it looks like Mercedes are happy with what's been proposed, which implies that they either have an advantage which is set to stay and the other teams will feel the wrath during the season, Or Toto is being honest in what he is saying, that this really was no big deal, there's no major advantage being gained by Mercedes, and the other teams were crying for no reason. So to me, that's like the only two realistic scenarios, that either Mercedes have locked in an advantage which will serve them well for years to come until other teams, I don't know, find another way to change the regulations to try and slow them down, or it's not really a big deal in the first place. So intrigued to your thoughts and all of that stuff, as always, in the comment section below. That's where we're going to leave it for today. Today, of course, Saturday. There's no more Fridays left until Grand Prix day begins. There's no more Saturdays left, really, until we get to Albert Park for the first Grand Prix. Hopefully, all goes smoothly and to plan. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.